Hi friends, it's Anne here, and today's video is a comparison video between these two products. So the Fenty Pro Filter Soft Matte Powder Foundation and the L'Oreal Infallible 24-Hour Fresh Wear Foundation in a Powder. So let's get into it. So first we're just going to talk about the Fenty Beauty Pro Filter Soft Matte Powder Foundation. This foundation costs $47 Canadian or $36 US. You get 9.1 grams, so that works out to be about just over $5 per gram, and it is in a whopping 50 shades, and like the shade range is actually pretty good. I feel like it's actually a really good range. It's not like, 45 really light shades and then like 5 medium to deep. Like it seems pretty broad and pretty spread out across the spectrum. So very good shade range on this. The compact is really nice. I love the Fenty sort of, what is this, octagon, like it's a little different shape. It's got a little mirror inside that says Fenty Beauty, and then it's got the little puff thing in the bottom that you can use for like applying it or touching up. In the second corner, we have the L'Oreal Infallible 24-Hour Fresh Wear Foundation in a Powder, novel of a name. This product, you get 9 grams of this. It costs, retail is $19.99 Canadian or $14.99 US, and you get 9 grams, so just ever so slightly less than the Fenty. And so that works out to be about $2.20 per gram Canadian. So this is basically half the price of this. Now, for a shade range, this does come in 16 shades, which you would think is a pretty good number, but when you actually look at the shade range, at least when I look at it on L'Oreal, like Paris's website, I'm like, wow, that's a pretty poor range. Again, when I actually went to pick this up, I got this at Rexall, which is a drugstore here in Ontario. I got it in Toronto. It was like 50 shades of beige. Like I couldn't figure out what shade of beige I am. Yeah, the shade range is pretty weird. And the one thing I don't like about the shade range on this is it's not clear. Like with the Fenty, they're very clear in terms of like cool undertone, warm undertone, neutral undertone, those kinds of things. Like I said, 50 shades of beige, and it was like, which beige am I? And then there's really not a whole lot on the deep end of the spectrum. Like there's just a handful of shades. I mean, there are deeper shades, but it's very heavily skewed, I think, to a lighter shade range. So I'm going to do this video like I've done a lot of my other comparison videos. I'm going to just put up some demos. So I'll probably show the demo of the L'Oreal Infallible first, and then I'll show the demo of the Fenty Pro Filter. I did the same technique for both of them. So I used the Hello Fab Coconut Smoothing Primer. It's one of my favorite primers. It's reliable. I like it. I use it with a lot of other foundations. And then in both the application videos, like the demo videos, I did use the little puff that comes in the foundation just to try it. I mean, that's what it came with. But normally, if I were to do a powder foundation, I would normally use like a dense brush. Like that's how I was playing with it other times. But anyway, let's just get into the little demos, and then we'll talk about the products after and my thoughts and comparisons. Okay, here I am just going in with my primer. I've applied it pretty liberally. I wanted to make sure I had a really smooth, moisturized base with applying a powder over top. I think I've mentioned this before, that I kind of have normal, sometimes dry skin. It's summertime right now, so I'm not really getting any dry skin, but I do get dry patches. So yeah, as soon as I started applying this, I was like, whoa, that is some coverage. So what I was doing was just applying it to one side of my face so that we can do a comparison to see the coverage. Oh, and that was Harley. Almost took out the camera. So yeah, that's why I'm applying it kind of in a weird half face way. I did find this one, I had to go over it quite a bit, but yeah, look at that difference. Like that coverage, The one thing I'll notice or say that when I looked at this on camera compared to when I did this in person, I feel like looking at the footage after this, I guess maybe it's the shade, because it's so thick, it is pretty hard to actually get an even application. So while on camera, it might have looked, I feel like maybe a little bit blotchy in some spots. I felt like by the time I finished all of my makeup, that really wasn't an issue anymore. I think maybe the heat of my face, like the skin, helped blend it a little bit more. But yeah, so it does look a little bit blotchy. Speaking of blotches, you'll see a blotch on my hand from some self-tanner. Whoops. So, yep, just wanted to show what it looks like with nothing else on my face. And just showing it close up. You'll see around my nose a little bit patchy. I did kind of go into that later when I noticed it and try and fix it up. It's definitely very matte. Okay, and just like the L'Oreal one, I went in with my primer, the Hello Fab Coconut Smoothing Primer. Again, very, very liberal, making sure I get it everywhere. I will say on this day, you can probably see it between this footage and the last footage that my skin was obviously a lot better on this day. My skin, it's not a trick of the camera, it's just some days it's just really red and irritated, and then this day it was not. So the one thing I'll note when I was applying this, it almost looks like you can't really see what I'm doing a little bit. Like this tone of this matches my face so well at this point, at least when I was filming this. But I do feel like I had to go back and forth into this powder a lot more. Like it's not as thick as the L'Oreal. So it took like a lot of back and forth between picking up product and putting it on, if that makes sense. So again, you can see the difference between it on the one half of my face. Just wanted to show it close up. I feel like this one just blends better into my face. But you can still see all my wrinkles, just so you know. The one thing I'll do note on this side is you can see right there, you can see how it covers up that redness around my brow where I had the tattooing, so there's like scarring. And I felt like this, made a difference. You can see that that covered that up. Which again, it seems so subtle. Like it doesn't seem like I'm really doing anything at least compared to the L'Oreal. You could really see the application of the L'Oreal one. And again, you can still see the blotch on the finger from the self-tanner. I will say this is not my favorite way of applying this product, but I wanted to try it with the actual puff that came in the product. Again, just showing what it looks like. It is a little light compared to my neck. You can see it's a little pale, but the shade is actually a really good match for me for most of the year. And that's just me being goofy. So I feel like the hype around this sort of like comparison and is it a dupe is like long gone. I bought these ages ago and I just never got around to filming the sort of dupe. And plus I kept like playing with them and testing them. I'm not a powder foundation person normally, so I did have to kind of really play with them and feel like I could get used to them. I will say that they're not dupes in my mind. They're both powder foundations, so it's reasonable to compare them, but I would not say one is a dupe for another. So just specifically my thoughts on this, as mentioned, the shade range is like, what? I feel like this product is thick, like it's a very thick powder. It's different than any other powder foundations that I've used or any other sort of like setting powders. Like it definitely has a different texture. I'll do a little swatch of both of them actually, and maybe you can see the texture difference. So I'm just kind of, so hopefully you can see it on my finger there, like you can see how thick it is. And then just do a swatch right here. So it's a pretty thick powder right there. And I think in the demo it was really apparent that like this foundation, powder foundation covers. The L'Oreal one is, just grabbing a swatch of this, kind of again, do the same thing, pretty liberal. So there it is on my ring finger there, that's the Fenty. Well, hopefully you can see there, the Fenty one is definitely thinner. It's a more lighter powder foundation. Obviously very different shades. I don't think I actually mentioned the shades. So the Fenty one is in 170, and then the L'Oreal Infallible one is in 125 Ivory Buff. So I felt like if you're looking for more full coverage, you're gonna like this a bit more. If you have really, really dry skin, I don't think you'll like this. I feel like it could, if you have really like dry patches and stuff. This one's probably gonna emphasize it more. If you have a lot of like really bad texture, this one's gonna emphasize it more. I will say with this one and the other one, both of them, I found like I was pleasantly surprised that they really both blurred my pores quite a bit. Like I really felt like my pores kind of disappeared, which was quite nice. For this, I felt like it is pretty thick, so I do find it a little tricky to work with, basically because, again, I'm not a powder foundation person normally, so it was like, how do I want to get some coverage, but not too much coverage, and I felt like this one, you kind of have to work with it to figure out how you want to apply it. With the sponge, on both of them, with the sponge, you're going to get the like highest coverage. Like this was such good coverage with this little sponge. The other thing I want to mention with this compact, this mirror is way better than the one in Fenty. I don't know what Fenty, you need to look at what they did with this mirror, because this mirror is so much better. Like I feel like I can really clearly see myself in this mirror, and I was like, wow, that's actually really a really good mirror. So from my perspective, this one is suitable for somebody that's looking for more coverage, and I think if you have maybe normal, probably oily skin as well, you're probably gonna like this. For both of them specifically, I felt like the longevity was okay. I have an issue where I feel like my face eats face makeup, so like I don't get super longevity out of anything, but I was pleasantly surprised that both products definitely really melded into the skin, and as the day went on, yes, it would wear away, but it was like not patchy. It wasn't like how you have with some like cream and liquid foundations where you might get like blotchy and like it might stick to some spots. I felt like both of them actually wore really nicely and really naturally. So just some specific thoughts on the Fenty Beauty one. Again, the mirror on this one is nice, but it's not as good as, maybe it's just a little more powdery too. I think that's the other thing too. The mirror on that one is underneath. There is sort of like a mirror here, but it's not the same. It's like wonky. So maybe for future Fenty, maybe put the mirror, a better mirror underneath. So the mirror on this one is not as good. With this powder foundation, it's much thinner and much lighter. It's much similar texture to other powder foundations that I've used. So I pulled this one. This is like a sample packaging, but this is the Clinique Almost Powder Makeup. And I feel like from a texture perspective, they're very similar. With this one, I felt like I could get a much more sheer coverage. So I actually preferred using this as like a setting powder, like over actual foundation. So that's how I'm wearing it today. Actually, let's just talk about that. So on my face today, I have the Tarte Clay Stick Foundation all over my face. And then I put the Fenty powder on this side, just to sort of like set, and the L'Oreal Infallible on this side with just a big fluffy brush to set. And like, you can't tell the difference. Like when you're using a powder, like either of these, it's going to be the same. So I guess from that perspective, it's kind of a dupe. If you're just using it as like a light setting powder, you're going to get a very similar effect. I just found personally this one a little easier to work with because it is thinner. So I could go very light-handed with it, or I could build it up. And I was pleasantly surprised because that's how I was kind of using it when I first started using it. And then when I used the little puff to see like how it would look, especially after using the L'Oreal one, I mean like, holy crap, that has so much coverage. I was pleasantly surprised at the coverage of this because it is so thin and because I just didn't expect I would get decent coverage out of it. And you get pretty decent coverage. Now again, it's probably not as high coverage as the L'Oreal Infallible. And I personally liked the finish of this better. The L'Oreal one can be a bit thicker, like I said, whereas this seemed a little bit more natural. It also could be a shade thing. Like I said, I like how Fenty describes their shades and their shade range, so I feel like I picked pretty much like a perfect match for me, like for regular. I filmed the demo like a little earlier in the summer. I'm maybe a little bit more tan right now, but not a whole lot, and it still works. Like I feel like from a shade match, this is like spot on, so I'm pretty happy about that. And yeah, like I just prefer, I guess, this powder. So that's my final thoughts on this in terms of what do I recommend. I recommend both for different reasons. I have a preference for this one. Like if I'm going to reach for one, I prefer to reach for this one. One of the things that I was using this for too is like on my nose. Like I tend to rub my nose a lot, wearing the mask as well. So what I would do is I would just have this like in my bathroom or in my purse, and I would just take like a little fluffy brush and I could just tap it on my nose gently, and it would like nicely blend that away without looking like, if you use like the puff, especially if you use the puff with this and you tried to do that, it was just like powder. Like you could definitely tell you just mattified your nose, and it was too much. Like you'd have to really try and buff it out. So I just gravitate towards this one a bit more, I think, just because of the texture and because I feel like I have a little bit more control over how much coverage I want. The only thing I really don't like about this, and if you know me, you're gonna know what I'm gonna say, it's the price. This is way too expensive. Like it's almost $50 Canadian. So my advice is always buy things on sale. And this isn't unique enough, at least for me, to purchase this again. So I was kind of playing it against this and realizing that they're both very similar. Now the Clinique one is 10 grams for $40, so it's cheaper than this one. This has an even worse range though than L'Oreal, so that's where it's going to be a deciding factor too. Like if you can find a shade in another powder, then you might want to go with something else just because this is so expensive. But if you are looking for like a very specific shade, or you find you're hard to shade match, then you're very much likely going to get it in the Fenty. Another powder I'm thinking off the top of my head is I used to have a CoverGirl powder in like, it was sort of that like lime green packaging. I don't think they have that packaging anymore, or that specific powder, but I also feel like this was similar to that powder as well in terms of texture. So like, again, I feel like from a texture perspective, this powder is not super unique. The other thing too is I was getting like hard pan on here. I used a bit of tape to get some of that off. Okay, so let's just wrap up with my final thoughts on these. Are they dupes? No. Do I have a preference? Yes. I personally prefer the Fenty one just because I like that it's a lighter coverage. I like the feeling of the powder a little bit more, and I like the shade a little bit better for me personally. But do I see that why people would really like this and who it's for? Definitely if you want more coverage. Definitely fairly affordable. Again, wait till it's on sale. It is pretty expensive in Canada. Like retail, it's $20. I'm pretty sure I paid a little bit more because I'm downtown, and I wanted to get it. Like again, I rushed out to get this like back in February or something like that. I never did this video, but yeah, like it's a nice enough powder. But I don't see myself repurchasing this powder. I'm not 100% sure I'd see myself repurchasing this, again, because I feel like I can find similar shades in other lines that are a little bit more affordable, but I do like this powder. Like, if somebody asked me, do you recommend this? I would say yes. as long as you're okay with that price tag, because it is a little bit pricey. So I hope this video was helpful. If it was, feel free to give it the little thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you did subscribe to my tiny little channel here in Toronto, Canada. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you sometime soon. Bye.